Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I'm happy to have you all, happy to see your faces again, and looking forward to this conversation. I'm Julie Szmyd. I'm host for this room and club. Just as we get started, I know we're waiting for some audience to fill in. I think we have all our panelists here today. Great having you all. A couple of things. For those just coming in, please use the share button at the bottom of your screen to share this room on social media or directly with others. You can share it into the hallways as well. We do encourage everyone to select the share on Clubhouse option. It will greatly increase the likelihood that someone will be able to find this room. And the chat feature is enabled. It's a great way for the audience to participate. If you have comments, questions, you can also back channel me directly. We do also encourage audience participation. So if you find yourself inspired, you can raise your digital hand and we'll do our best to get to everyone. Please note our club is called Consuli Conversations. In addition to this room, we host a few others. We have a Data Dignity, Dealing You into the Data Economy. We cover long COVID, where patients meet researchers, and we have a room dedicated to sickle cell, where we explore the question, how is solving sickle cell disease related to health equity? Plus, we have new rooms on the horizon to look out for soon. You can learn more by following our club, Consuli Conversations. Just click the little greenhouse at the top, give it a follow, you'll see our profile, and in there you'll see all our upcoming events. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you would like to be on this panel next month or have someone to recommend, I love hearing from you guys. You can find my email in my bio directly. And be sure to follow Consuli on social media. You'll find us at Consuli_Inc. And for those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year, so we help people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and make medicine better. We do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent, and our members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join our movement, and you can learn more at consuli.net. I've pinned the link to the top of the room there. Check us out. And momentarily, I'll also pin a link to our public virtual whiteboard that is dedicated to this room, the topics, conversations, and all else that get captured there. So please, we welcome you to peruse the highlights from past conversations and make any additional comments, suggestions, ideas if you find yourself inspired. So it is our community board, and I will be pinning that in just a second. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room co-facilitators, Michael Young and Sophia Hannon, who will be introducing our themselves and our expert guests. Michael, now over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate that introduction, and recognizing that this get-together is typically taking place on the first Thursday of each month, but because of some travel conflicts, et cetera, we decided to do this on Wednesday this month, but next month be looking for the first Thursday. I want to give a warm welcome to our Clubhouse membership here, essentially made up largely of clinical trialists, pharma industry execs, and of course the important patient inputs that come here from people who are interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. I'm just going to give kind of a little framework here as to what we've been doing for the last month or so. We have been working around the topic of what we call JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And last month, we had a really excellent discussion on the meaning of justice and the rights of individuals to have visibility into their data and the use of their data, and certainly as much transparency into their engagement around clinical trials. this meeting today, we will be devoted to the second letter in JEDI, and that is equity. And I just want to frame that from the standpoint that there are a lot of questions about the differences between equity and equality, and assuring equity in clinical trials is a topic that I think many of us had opportunities to chat about, but we'd like to bring this together in a better understanding today. So I'm going to turn this over to Sophie. And also, Sophie, just make a quick note here that typically we would have been joined by Edye Edens, but Edye is just had kind of a little family emergency, and unfortunately may be able to join us later, but right now is not on board. But I think between the two of us and the terrific folks that we've got on the panel, especially people like Jennifer and Pamela and Scott, we should be able to pull this through. So, Sophie, please introduce yourself, and let's move on with the one burning question. Over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael and Julie. Again, I'm thrilled to be here for our monthly clinical trial clubhouse, One Burning Question. We have missed all of you, as Michael mentioned, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about or remember. We took a break for the summer, so we are back on track, and we definitely missed these discussions and the learnings that come with them. So I'm Sophie Johannan. For those of you who don't know me, my background is in medicine and in clinical trials. I am currently a clinical scientist at a medical device company called Gala Therapeutics. I have now 19 years experience in clinical trials and multiple different therapeutic areas and many different roles. And so my passion is to bring all of those stakeholders together that Michael mentioned: clinical trial professionals, healthcare professionals, regulators, and the patients, the people who really are on the ground getting this work done. And how do we make sure that we ensure equity for not only for the patients, but for all involved? So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, I really want to give everyone a chance, all the panelists, a chance to introduce themselves, a brief introduction. And so we're going to proceed in PTR order, pull to refresh. So if you touch your screen and drag it down, it should refresh the order of panelists on the stage. And we will proceed from left to right and top to down. So first will be Pamela, and then Jennifer, and then Scott, and then Christine, and Taya, and Sandra. So please kindly pass the mic when you are you've completed your brief introduction to the next panelist after you in PTR order until we've reached the last panelist on the stage, and then I will introduce the OBQ. Over to you, Pamela.
Thank you, Sophie. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited about this topic. I work in research, so I work for a large academic hospital, Hartford Healthcare in Connecticut, and I do the auditing of the research trials, but primarily I'm coming to you as a research patient. So I spent 11 years participating in pediatric clinical trials in the rare disease space. So I'm super passionate about rare diseases and glad to be here with all of you today. I'll pass the mic.
Hi guys, it's Jennifer. My name is Jennifer Bonfrisco, and I come from really a clinical operations background. I've been working as a director, senior director, running trials for 30 plus years. Right now, I'm running a couple rare diseases in ophthalmology. So, what I do primarily most of my day is figure out ways to get patients excited about being in our programs and how to find them and get them involved. So equity is certainly something we think about every day because we're trying to get everybody that we can excited to be part of our programs. So I pass the mic.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And thanks to Consuli for having me in again as part of this panel. Really excited about this topic today as well. For those that I have not met, my name is Scott Schliebner, and I have a background in public health. I'm a clinical trialist and have some overlapping background with Jennifer and Pamela, certainly. Been in clinical drug development for 30 years. Really embrace a patient-centric mindset when it comes to designing clinical trials and thinking about access to clinical studies, and really embracing the model of clinical research really as a care option. So day to day, I think about patients. I think about how we can lower the burden, and I try to get our industry to move to think about the ultimate stakeholders, patients themselves, when we're designing and conducting clinical trials. So excited for the topic, and I will keep passing it along to, I believe, Christine next.
Yeah, that was me. Thanks, Scott. So, Christine von Reisfeld here. I am a rare disease, autoimmune, heart failure patient, whatever, but really focused on the idea of patients owning and having agency over their own data or digital rights. I myself am on Social Security disability. And one of the ways that I like to talk about data with people is explaining that my data is my song. And so I think it kind of brings a different tone to it and lets people think about it in a whole different way. So I'll move on and give it to Taya.
Thank you, Christine. That's really beautiful. I like thinking of your data that way. Um, my name is Taya Romero. I have worked in clinical research since 2004, and currently I'm a relationship manager. My focus is on operational psychology, so I'm looking at how to strengthen relationships within the companies and especially focused on employee sustainability. And I will pass it to Sandra.
Good day, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is having a good day thus far. My name is Sandra L. I am a managing partner of MediHelps LLC, where our focus is on patient engagement and patient empowerment. I am once again so glad to be on the stage with such a powerhouse of panelists. And when it comes to equity, let's not forget, as we're talking about equity, that we bring in that other word, the other EQU word, which is equality, because they're both just as important and they both have their own separate and unique stands, but we need to talk about them together instead of separate. This is Sandra L. And back to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sandra. She never fails to make me think every time, Sandra. Thank you. So, with everyone introduced, let's open up this one burning question. So, this is the question for today, which I've also posted in our group chat for your referral. When it comes to clinical trials, we now agree that one of the 4 patient-centric JEDI goals of improved enrollment is achieving equity. Different than equality, as Sandra pointed out, equity speaks to the fair compensation and valuation of each patient's contributed data, time, compliance with guidelines of participation, and adherence to protocol. What does equity in clinical trials mean to you, or how is it important? And what can we do to assure real equity for all our participants? Okay, so I want you to think about that. We're going to start with our panelists and then open it up to everyone here. So I will be looking for specifically solution-based, forward-thinking discussion points in particular. Again, please raise your hand if you'd like to be called onto the stage when we get to that section, so Julie can start bringing you up. If you are new to Clubhouse and or Consuli One Burning Question discussion, please ensure your profile is complete with a photo and a short description of your background so that we know how you're connected to this topic. Once on stage, a slow tap of your mic can indicate that you have a question or a comment or a response to another panelist's discussion or comment. A fast tap indicates agreement or applause. And there you go. You get Michael's demonstrating for us, fast tap. And feel free to use the room chat feature to share an idea or a link or a resource with all participants. Okay, so now thinking about equity for all participants, how can we ensure that? How is that important to you? And how can we ensure that for all participants? I'm going to open up the room with Pamela.
Thank you, Sophie. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different take because I'm living this quandary with equity versus equality right now. And this is like personal story. So they are different, as Sandra pointed out. Equity is that people are treated fairly and just. Equality is that people are treated equally. But in the rare disease space, people have much different needs. So, as somebody with a rare disease, I will use me as an example. My medication costs $90,000 a month. My son, who has the same disease, his medication costs $45,000 a month with copays that can run like $3,000 to $5,000 a month with the two of us combined. That's ridiculous, right? So, after participating in a clinical trial, I think it's fair to assume that patients have an expectation that they will have access to medication. That's what the hope is. The hope is to not only find something that works and helps them with their disease, but at the end that they have access to it. But what happens if equity isn't there and access for certain populations of patients isn't there? And using my case example, this is why Sophie invited me to the meeting. I'm experiencing an access issue, meaning I participated in clinical trials and helped bring several drugs to market. I'm benefiting from those drugs. I use my insurance. I want my son to benefit from those drugs. I'm very excited that there are drugs to begin with for our rare disease, but he does not have access to them. Why? Because there are laws in place that pediatric patients using the drugs off-label are not eligible for certain programs to help make the drugs affordable, such as charitable assistance programs. So if we can't afford the drugs, the participation that I did in the clinical trials, I'm happy I have access, but I'm very upset he does not. And to me, that is not equity, because if I was poor, and they've said if I was on Medicaid, he would have access to the drugs. They would be free. So the population of patients who participated that falls in the middle class, that is not rich enough to afford the giant copay, but not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, doesn't have access. And to me, that's not equity. Equity is not everybody needs exactly the same. Sophie is a good friend of mine, does not need $90,000 worth of medication. She's fortunate to have better health than me, but I do. And so this is why I think having equity at the end of the trial to make sure the patients have access is so important. And this is why laws need to be in place that protect the patients over the insurance companies. In particular, the HELP Act that is in the Senate right now is extremely important for rare disease patients to ensure they have equity through access to care. I will pass the mic.
Sophie, do you mind if I go next? Because I'm about to hop in the car and I don't want to
Please.
get spotty as I drive.
Yes.
I love everything that you said there, but I also want to kind of flip it a little bit too and really touch on the topic of the equity. So I think when I think of equity and when I think about equity in healthcare, there's so many different things that come up, and depending on the person I'm talking to, it's looked at differently. And I think when we talk equity, a lot of times we're talking about access to care, when I think the bigger discussion really lays in the data. And so we're moving into a new digital world where patients are now having to generate, consolidate, and share their data. And when they're sharing that, we have to make sure that they're collecting quality data. And again, as somebody who does not work and is on Medicare, we have to have options for people to be able to survive off of the data that they're producing. And I think if you're looking at equity, there has to be some sort of way to generate a basic income off of the data that people produce, but as well looking at, if you're looking at that equity piece, of some type of tax exemption for people who are on Social Security and dependent on a healthcare system that's run by the government. So there's so many issues here to tackle. But when I like talking about equity, I like talking about the business of healthcare. And as a patient, as a stakeholder, we don't have that equity in the business that everybody else has, but we are the ones that are generating that data. And so I think for me, equity goes back to looking at what a person is putting into this. And just because we're sick, we all know we pay people, healthy people, to participate in clinical trials. But once you get sick, that's no longer an option. And so to me, these are some of the questions that I like to bring up. But one of the things that I think we need to do is really look at how we give agency back, or to patients, not back because we never had it, but how we give that agency to patients to allow them to be able to combine their data with other patients, to be able to help us fill clinical trials in a way that as an industry, we can't. And so I think we need to look at the part that a patient plays in providing that data and what it's worth, and also quality of life and how people survive, because everybody else is pulling in a paycheck except for the patients who are suffering. And I'll leave it at that.
Wow. Now we've got two distinct perspectives from the patient perspective. I wasn't expecting that, so thank you, Christine and Pamela. Now I think I'd like to hear from one of our clinical trial professionals. Jennifer, would you mind being first to impart your perspective?
Sure. It's a little bit tough as a follow-up because I was kind of wondering what Scott was going to say too. Because one of the challenges we have um, is, look, if a trial is in, if it's still in the clinical trial space, right? It's before it's gotten approved. Um, we want to be able to offer it to people at the completion of the study, but because it's not approved yet, we often cannot. And, there's the Right to Try Act, and there's different, compassionate use. So sometimes, yeah, I mean, that's an option that as sponsors we want to give, but I think sometimes it's just not possible. And as Pamela had said, these drugs will often cost $100,000. So as small biotech companies, sometimes just cannot do it, or it's a blinded study and they have supply issues. So sometimes that is a logistics issue, that it just honestly isn't possible in the early development stages, if that's a fair response. And I think a lot, like you're saying, a lot of these topics are very complicated. If you're going to start talking about insurance companies and insurance coverages, and how the government's reimbursing for things, that's a whole different gigantic can of worms, right? So let me hand it over to Scott. See what you think of this topic.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Jennifer. And awesome comments, Pamela, and perspective from Pamela and Christine as well. I struggle a little bit with, I view clinical research as a care option, right? CRACO, that clinical trials, especially for those of us, it sounds like we have a lot of rare disease experience here on the panel. There are not a lot of treatments, as you alluded to, Pamela, for most of the now more than 10,000 rare diseases. There's very few that trials not only are the only care for most patients and families, they're also the only source of hope, right? For many, many families out there looking for something for themselves or their children or those they take care of. So while clinical trials and healthcare, I think, merge together in a lot of areas. I also see the conversation in the threads here that, you know, I guess I'm trying to think about, I'm going to, for myself, narrow back down specifically, just thinking a little bit about clinical trials, because it's hard to sort of boil the whole ocean here on our panel today. But, you know, the equality component, I love the analogy that was difference. It always helps remind me around the difference between these two pieces. And since we're focused on equity today, that idea that I like the stool analogy. So that for equality is that the analogy is everybody's given the same size stool to see, right? So if you're 5 foot or 6'2", you're still given the same size stool, which doesn't result in an equitable really outcome. Equity, really, the way I think about it, is that sort of everybody to the same level, right? Something that gives everybody, it meets people where they are. And when you take that analogy and you extend it to patients in clinical trials, meeting patients / families / people where they are, right? So I'm really focused in the weeds on how do we, and when you talk to patients and when you talk to advocates for patients, and you listen to why did they participate in a study or why did they not participate in a study, you start getting at the end user's real perceptions here. And I think that's always important for us to go back to, really the people on the ground that we're trying to serve. What is their experience? Because as a white guy living in Seattle, Washington, my challenges are few and far between compared to some folks who cannot access clinical studies. So when you talk to people, obviously we hear things around travel, we hear things about cost, we hear things about communication, we hear things about it was never offered to me or I don't understand it. So I'm always thinking about how do we make clinical trials more accessible and less burdensome? How do we take out a lot of the unnecessary administrative steps? How do we take out a lot of the maybe unnecessary data points that we look to gather? So when we, as sponsors, when we gather in a, like I like to say, in a conference room in New Jersey, line up different wants and needs that we have. We want blood samples at this time point and physical examinations here and MRIs on this time point. Often there's very little consideration given to the human being on the other end of that actually has to go through all those hoops and jump through all those hurdles, right? So I'm hyper focused on how do we reduce the burden and thereby make it a little more accessible to everyone and create a little more equality in the process. So, fortunately or unfortunately, the pandemic really shone a really bright spotlight on health disparities related to the coronavirus amongst ethnicity and race. It also kicked us in the butt a little bit around moving towards decentralized models where we can bring things to people. So there's some nice momentum out there. I'm thinking about things, though, about how do we, not just do we move to decentralized studies so we can remove maybe a little bit of the geography limitations, but we also have some technology limitations out there as well, right? We're not all operating from the same equitable baseline of like, what technology can we use and are we comfortable on telehealth? Not to mention, do we even trust our investigator physician who we're working with? So I'm thinking about those kinds of tangible steps of how do you make it easier? How do you make it less burdensome? How do you remove some of the financial barriers to clinical trials? Because yes, as many of you know, it does cost money to participate in a clinical trial. It costs money out of your pocket to travel and park and eat and stay places. And hopefully people are working on things to get you reimbursed quickly or maybe even prepay for things. But most of the times that's still a barrier. So financial burden is real. So I will pause there and hand it over here to Taya soon, because I'm deep diving a little bit more into a specific area around clinical trial access, and maybe someone else would like to chime in around rounding that out with some other perspectives.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. I really don't want to glaze over what you're saying, though, because you did go into something specific. But the idea of giving a little more power to the patients, a little more access, a little more control is really what we're talking about, whether it's, to increase diversity in clinical trials or to reduce the burden. One thing I've mentioned before in our past discussion rooms is the idea of a patient focus group that is involved at the outset of a trial during the design phase when we are designing the protocol and trying to figure out how many follow-up visits we need, how many blood tests, as you mentioned, really need to happen during those follow-up visits, or which ones we can skip, and really paring it down to only what we need for data and sample size and our statistical power, instead of, okay, well, we have a 12-month visit, so we're going to put another set of blood draw there. That's not equitable or
Right.
fair for the patient. I think that's some of what you were bringing up. I mean,
Yeah,
that's very important.
that input up front is so critical, right? So not only can you do focus groups, but before those studies are finalized, because we hear a lot from sponsors that say, oh, that's didn't realize that was going to be so hard for patients. Unfortunately, the clinical protocol has been finalized and we can't go back and change
Right.
anything now, right? Like how often do you hear that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we want to move this conversation much further upstream. So when sponsors are sitting in that proverbial New Jersey conference room around a table, putting all those different X's in boxes on their schedule of assessments of what they want to happen during every week and every time point, we need at that point to run that through and pressure test that with a group of patients and advocates and caregivers who are our target audience. The way
Yes.
Apple would test out a new camera on their phone, they don't just decide, hey, let's put a camera on our iPhone and see if people want it. It's all consumer driven, right? So let's have our clinical trials be a little bit more consumer, quote unquote, driven by, hey, here's what we're thinking for this new study. Can you and your people and your constituents handle this? Is this too much to ask of you? Let's do that early before they wrap up that protocol at a draft stage.
Yes, when we're just designing the
Yep.
protocol. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, I think now Taya will have even more to say. So Taya, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, when I'm listening to the patients, I just feel very, heartbroken because I feel that our healthcare system is so dysfunctional. It's completely failing patients. And clinical research was never designed as a healthcare plan or a healthcare solution. We are research and development. So, we can talk about that as a separate topic of how our healthcare system needs to be fixed. But, generally, this top down model doesn't work. Companies deciding what the consumer needs, it doesn't work. They need to offer a seat at the table. We need to have representation from every group that is marginalized, because they bring something to the table that we will not consider, right? I mean, you see this all the time where someone thinks, oh, yeah, we never ran that by women to know that, the flow isn't a good name for our company. That literally came up recently. So yeah, I think you need to have a seat at the table for those that are marginalized and actually listen to their concerns. And then we need to start strategically looking at what the consumer needs, because this is a consumer, the patient is the consumer. They have power. They cannot buy the product, which we saw in the unfortunate failure of the Alzheimer's drug that came out last year. Consumers just didn't use it. So where was that miscommunication where we thought that was such a great investment, and then the information that got to the consumer where they did not want to participate? So I think we need to, change that model, flatten this power structure a bit, and start listening.
Fantastic.
Sophie, this is
Yeah.
Sandra. Can I
I was just going to
add
ask
in
you.
when Taya's done?
Please do.
As I sit here listening to this conversation, and as a board certified patient advocate, one that works wholeheartedly with patients and has a voice for the patients, I'm listening at the clinical side. There's things that they want. And then there's also things that the patient wants and need. And I think what really needs to happen to, get this equitable, there's a couple of things that I think needs to happen. But one thing for sure is that we need to come to a consensus. So we need to find, the clinical team needs to find out, what does the patient want and need? And the patient needs to also understand that there are certain things that the clinical team wants and needs in order for them to help us. The problem is that there are a lot of patients that don't understand that, and there are a lot of clinicians that overlook the fact that the patients really simply don't understand the power that they have in their voice. So what needs to happen? The two sides need to come together. They need to, and we as patients, we want a seat at the table. We want to be there with the politicians and with the scientists. We just want a seat at the table. That seat at the table for us will allow the clinicians and allow the scientists and everyone else that's involved to understand what the patient wants and needs, because the patient will be allowed to talk. So until we can get to a middle ground, in the middle of the road, there's some things that are going to continue to be left untouched and unsaid. And unfortunately, the patients will be hurt by the fact that they're not even spoken to. This is Sandra, and I'm back to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, a consensus and a little bit more education and information is definitely called for at this point. Thank you for reminding us about that. Next, I want to pass the mic to Ruby Simmons, who's new to our stage, but really had some good insights in the chat room, and I wanted to hear from her. Ruby, over to you. Ruby, can you unmic? Do you know how to unmic yourself and be able to share with us? Let me see. Maybe not. Okay, we will come back to Ruby. Michael, did you want to add?
I just wanted to reach out to Ruby in case she just couldn't hear you. Ruby, if you're able to join us, please flash your mic there. Otherwise, we can get to Christine, because I think Christine is chomping at the bit here to to add some thoughts. Christine? Sophie,
And I,
maybe it's
Oh,
me.
here you go. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, we
there
can
you
hear
go.
you
Yeah.
now.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of tack on to what Sheila said, and really, sorry, my map says I'm driving. One of the things that I wanted to say is that it's not just having a patient at the table. It's actually involving in the conversation and making sure that you have patients who are sitting at the table who actually understand the process as well, so that they're not being taken advantage of in some of these conversations. And so I think our idea of patients in our industry is kind of that poor, pathetic person. And we're trying to change that image in the patient community of that is not who you are. You are actually an essential part of this system. And I think that's what we need to really look at is we are important, and it's not just getting our voice, it's actually hearing and listening and engaging us in a conversation, and not having a token patient come in just to approve whatever it is so you get a patient perspective. But I'll leave it there. Did you get all that, Michael?
I did, Christine. Thank you very much for opining. I think all of us are trying to do, because we're recognizing, honestly, that within this context of JEDI, all of these things kind of are interconnected. So you can't really have true justice without equity. You can't really have that diversity without some level of inclusion. And so we're recognizing that this is a complex topic, and all of us have been kind of chipping away at this and talking about things that are interrelated absolutely to equity. I see that Ruby is back, and I want to go to Ruby next. but I wanted to make sure that everybody is understanding that I think in some ways we haven't really even defined the difference between equality and equity. So we can also have some conversation about that. But Ruby, since you reconnected here, let's get you in here. You ready? Thank you.
Can you hear me
We
now?
can. We can hear you. Thank you.
Great. It's something when you do a Zoom meeting and then you come back in and try to talk, my mic goes out. I don't know what that's about, but I apologize. My name is Ruby Simmons, and I just came in. This is my first time. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm listening to the conversation. And so I was thinking, one of the things you're talking about clinical trials, and one of my experiences as a revenue cycle manager is dealing with um, drugs and trials where patients come in and have services rendered for like cancer and other rheumatoid arthritis issues and things like that. So one of my experiences is having a medical billing service or knowledgeable person in medical billing and case management to assist you with the patients when it comes to them getting services rendered and having to get authorization for services like a clinical trial that the insurance may consider. Most of the time, clinical trials and other new drugs and things like that are considered experimental investigational, and they're not covered. You have to have a case manager and a provider that is willing to write up services for the patient, a plan of service for this patient, and give it to the insurance to help them decide whether they will authorize and help pay for these services for the patient. You also need a case manager to help with following up on the patient and making sure the patient gets this blood work done, making sure the patient goes to the clinic to the follow-up appointments on time, making sure that they're taking whatever medication that they should be taking that helps to assist them through this clinical trial, and any other care that they may be getting right now. A lot of times, uh, patients they get sick and they have a hard time just following up, doing what they need to do, and sometimes they need that extra push, and having somebody that's following up on them and calling them and letting them know that there's somebody there that cares about making sure that they get the best out of their clinical trial and out of their medication that they're taking, and the services or procedures that they're having done through this clinical trial will help the success of not just the patient but the clinical trial in itself. And I'm hoping I'm touching on this correctly and I understand what you're looking for to assist in the clinical trial overall, because it sounds like what you're talking about is creating a new clinical trial and the help and things that you need in this. And I think that also medical billing service can help you in other areas to assist you administratively um, when it
Yeah,
comes
I
to the
think I get
clinical
it,
trial.
Ruby. You're talking about equity in coverage, right?
Yes.
For the patient, and if they have someone to help them to ensure
Hmm.
insurance coverage and billing, and that all of the paperwork is done
Right.
properly and submitted on time, then maybe it wouldn't be so much of a burden on the patient.
Yep.
So Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for that perspective. I would love to hear anyone's response. What do you think about what Ruby has added about equity and coverage, billing? Jennifer, please.
I think it's very interesting, and I had a call actually just this morning about it. And I see Antonio's joined as well. And Antonio, I have to call you after because I have a question about this very same patient. So this is an example. We have a site in Texas, and they called me about a patient that's traveling far. They are trying to go down to border cities and trying to get some of the patients that need treatments to bring them up to San Antonio for an ophthalmology center, ophthalmology study. We're desperate to get the patients, so we're paying a lot of money. We're sending Uber Health. We will pay to move these people. But look, it's a big, honestly, it's a big burden. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And the reality is a lot of smaller pharmas don't have those kind of resources. We also have a limited budget. We will have a budget to pay for reimbursement and hotel, but there has to be some limit. So, and then I love what you said, Ruby, because what I would personally like to do is be that like a patient concierge sort of thing. But we typically don't have that because we rely on the sites to be the main conduit to the patients. So as the sponsors, we don't have access to the patients like that. I kind of wish we did because, we could make things easier for them. But, maybe that's something that some sponsors can think about, having like a real patient advocate that can help give better service to them. But, usually we don't. We're all short staffed. And then the sites are even more short staffed. So I think they're great ideas. Um, and I'd love to be able to do it. And I think sponsors would want to do it too. Because look, sponsors want to recruit these patients. We want to serve them. Um, it's just a lot of logistical stuff in the way.
And
Kundu.
can I jump in because I think you made an excellent point, and you're absolutely right. So I work for an oncology network, and one of the things that we do is to assist with the logistics. But what you run into quickly is a lot of administration, right? You run into GDPR. People are afraid. Can we help you? Can we allow you to help us with the patients, give you patients information to get them to and from where they need to be? So there's always, it is very complicated. And also, I was interested to find when I was at ASCO this year, there are a number of charities, and what they do is to help patients get to research that's outside of their area to help with airfare or trains or hotel and that sort of thing. And again, I think back to Ruby was saying, this can help, but how do we connect the patients who really need it to those charities, and also figure out a way if patients are like, I don't care if they know my name and address, if they're going to get me to and from the clinic when I need to be there, in a way that I'm not kind of getting up early and waiting for a bus at some ungodly hour. So definitely think that just need to do a better job as an industry connecting together. And one other really quick point that somebody made earlier, and that is about using clinical research for care. And we do say all the time that we should use clinical research as a care option, but it should never be a care necessity. Like the only way you're going to get health care is that you have to participate in a clinical trial. Sorry, my name is Almenia. Thank you.
So I
Can
would
I
I would
interject?
like to add to what Almina was saying. Would they have organizations like Ronald McDonald House and other places like that that can that assist in helping patients from other from outs that can't afford to get like the plane fare and they need places to stay. Now, typically some of them are from out of the country, but there's also other services out there that assist patients with this kind of stuff. And then also it was something else that I wanted to add to that as far as assistant. I think I was thinking more on outside of the country, and I was thinking of more of like an embassy kind of assistant for patients. but I wanted to add that information just in case, because I wasn't sure if this is a global initiative or just a initiative for here. But I just wanted to add that.
Uh,
Can I
yeah.
step in for one quick second? I just wanted to say one of the things that I speak a lot on at conferences around building communities for sponsors, right? And one of the things that I like to talk about is really pairing up with those organizations who are really helping communities. Because what I don't think that people understand is that as patients, we can connect with other patients. I can tell you any patient in the world pretty much that has some of the rare conditions that I have. And that's where we need to look at utilizing the patient advocacy groups and the patients who are versed in their space and in healthcare to really conduct some of these things. I mean, we pay a lot of money in recruiting that really isn't necessary if you reach out to the patient groups who are connected to their communities and if we're providing benefits for those communities while we work with them. So that's my thoughts on really trying to engage those parts of it.
Thank you,
And I'm
Christine.
Christine, my perspective.
Thank you so much, Christine. I know we have a lot of comments coming back and a lot of great responses.
Mhm.
I just wanted to give Antonio a chance to speak since he's come to the stage and hadn't had a chance yet. I also like the sound of his voice, and I would like to hear it one time. Antonio, please. Oh, did we lose Antonio?
He's too busy blushing right now. He can't come on.
Nice.
Yeah, he's
All right, Scott. I know Scott's got something really juicy for us.
Juiciness coming. Well, maybe, and we'll sort of see if Antonio can find his unmute button because I'd love to hear his thoughts too. But just back to, I don't know how juicy this is, but back to a little bit of the comments around, the practicalities of sponsors, limited budgets, maybe needing to stay arm's length distance from patients, things like that. Totally agree. That is the reality. I also feel like we need to challenge ourselves and we need to challenge our colleagues in our industry to push through some of these administrative barriers that exist. For those of you who've been around a long time like myself, you'll remember when we first looked at moving from paper-based case report forms to electronic data
EDC,
capture,
yes.
right? EDC, and it was like, oh my, we can never do this. We're a regulated industry. We can't make these
We need the
changes.
pink and the
Granted, back
yellow
then,
copies. What?
right? You got to have that paper, right? People will never move to doctors' offices will never move to that, right? Granted, back then we had poor internet access and we had not the best sort of systems and things. We've moved to some similar sort of analogous situations lately with like DCT providers and mobile health apps. And can we really move in these directions? That's a lot. There's an extra form to fill out. We have to go through IRB approval. I feel like those of us who to be in this industry have done so because we're passionate about patients and we want to make a difference. And I think there are administrative and bureaucratic hurdles all over the place, right? There are barriers everywhere you look, whether it's IRB signatures or shipping drug or state to state, country by country regulations. I think that we have to kind of battle and push through those hurdles that are overcomable. I look around us at other industries. I know I made the Apple phone sort of silly analogy earlier with the camera. I know we're a regulated industry, obviously, for sure. And those regulations serve a really important purpose, mostly for protecting patients. But some of those same regulations almost get in the way of us helping patients. And I feel like we need to be pushing limits and raising our voices. So, for example, do sponsors have budgets to pay for patient concierge services? No, that's still a relatively new thing. And so not everyone has a line item in their budget for that. However, here's what we do know. 60% of all clinical trials are running behind schedule. Patients drop out because studies are too burdensome. Some patients never enroll because of the cost or the time or whatever, right? So there's a lot of cost savings to be had by implementing some of these new innovative approaches that could be a little bit out of the box. But if you can provide some way of eliminating the financial burden and eliminating some emotional burden for a study, yes, maybe you will spend a little bit on some of those things. You'll also finish your clinical trial a year earlier, and your clinical development costs will go down overall. So there are some good peer-reviewed publications out there on how patient-focused approaches actually result in faster clinical development and lower your costs. So if your CFO out there thinks that these ideas of patient concierge is kind of nice, or it's soft and it's fluffy and it doesn't make a big difference, I'll send you to the article. There's an ROI on this. If you don't believe it's the right thing to do, if you don't believe it's the ethical thing to do, for some of those people, we can also get them looking at just the bottom line. It actually makes financial sense to remove the hurdles for patients, make it easier. Not only do your clinical trials get done faster, the overall cost of development is lower, the cost of those drugs eventually is lower. So if we can kind of keep fighting the battle and keep fighting the good fight of working through these administrative hurdles, and just don't let them, I just think we need to not like it's too hard. I think we need to fight through them, and then we need to change them. And I think we see regulators especially actually open-minded to hearing some of these things. So that's my that's a little bit of that's a juicy soapbox 2 cents there on keep fighting, folks. And if you're finding
Overcomeable.
people, it's overcomable, and it might be a
Yes,
little difference, but like we need to keep being different because the way we've been doing things really is not cutting it.
right. Just when we think we can't do it, that's when we should try to do it. Exactly. Overcomeable. That's my new word. Antonio, are you back? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think he's on the board, but maybe he can't hear us.
I'm just going
Sometimes
to
it
add,
helps if
Scott.
you, oh,
If
I
I
was going to say, sometimes it helps if you leave the stage and then come back on. I don't know if he's done that yet.
Well,
oh,
there he
there we
goes.
go.
And now he's
There he
back.
goes, and here he comes back.
Can you hear me?
There you
Yay!
Yes,
go.
we can.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Good to hear from you all. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk again. I'm very happy to be in this focus group. I just want to give you a little bit of background about myself and the company I work for, just for those people that haven't heard me before. Very much, we are a CRO that is operational in Mexico, in Guadalajara and Mexico City. But we are a U.S. register in Florida. And one of the things that we're doing is that we are working towards increasing diverse population within clinical trials that are submitted for the U.S. FDA for approvals. And I come from a research background. Actually, I have a doctorate in human molecular genetics. And this conversation actually brought me back to when I was interning at the CDC back in 2007 for an environmental health leadership program. And I remembered, one of the things that worked really nicely with these types of situations is at the CDC. It was the longitudinal data that was collected, that have been collected multiple from various types of research, and I think that can be also implemented for the issue of equality versus equity, in terms of increasing participation. So let me explain how specifically. So what I mean. So I don't know if you're aware, but there are several modifiable risk factors for different complex and diseases such as cardiovascular disease and cancer that are directly associated, with type of lifestyle factors that are present amongst unfortunately low-income communities. And one of the things that we can do is communicate to the public as to how effective it will be for us to, and I say us because I live in those communities before, and for us to enter enroll in a clinical trial and ultimately help become a key member of my community's public health. So let me explain. So let's say that we're looking at body mass index, waist circumference, blood pressure, physical inactivity, and smoking, high alcohol consumption. If you look at some of those chronic stress associated, lifestyles, risk factors, they are actually increased prevalence in areas with social dysfunction, where you have unequal communities that's been shown scientifically to raise blood pressures, lead to adoption of unhealthy coping behaviors such as smoking, unhealthy eating, alcohol consumption, and those behaviors can ultimately impact, right, cardiovascular and chronic disease. So if you start looking at wanting to recruit patients from these high income inequality areas and seeing, so how can you, by being part of a clinical trial, you'll be able to participate towards, making your community a better place. And if we partner up with the CDC, with other public health offices, which I think we should be on a more constant basis, and start linking, brainstorming how we can link those two messages together into a public health information, then potentially speaking, not saying it's casually, but at least correlationally, we'll be able to link participation in clinical trial to lowering crime rate, reducing, increasing social cohesion in areas where you have reduced social cohesion, and then improving things like physical activity, and then therefore reducing BMI, blood pressure, and other cardiovascular disease risk factors. And that's just for one particular contextual effect on cardiovascular health. But if you look at other health outcomes in other types of complex diseases, neurology, psychiatric, cancer events. So I think that, just as a summary, being able to be actively involved in your community and knowing that you can have a direct impact on your public health within your city or within your state and therefore the nation, I think that gives us minorities, populations, more of a social responsibility to be part of a clinical trial, because that has a direct impact on my community. That's just my 2 cents, and that's something that we're implementing here in Mexico really nicely. Is that and we're working with indigenous local communities that have various types of comorbid diseases. And I think that one thing that we can learn from this is really touching, collaborating with the CDC and other public health offices, and also making sure that when we are recruiting patients, as it was spoken here in this meeting, that we are inviting people to contribute to the overall public health and a better lifestyle for within in these types of communities. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Antonio. Michael, I'm really curious as to your response or your opinion there. There was a lot packed in that paragraph there, Antonio.
Well, thanks, Sophie, and I obviously appreciate your moderation of this. I wanted to kind of keep quiet and listen to what everyone was contributing, and you can see that there's really I think there's still, and I know that several folks have commented in the comments in the chat. There's so much work to be done here. The reality, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is because it's been referred to or alluded to in several people's comments, is about the cost of these trials, the the personal commitment, et cetera, the need for reimbursement. But I think that equity goes well beyond reimbursement or compensation that just takes care of the cost of being involved in the trial. I think that equity really has to address the value that patients provide by being engaged in a clinical trial from start to end. As we well know, a lot of these patients will drop out over time. But for those patients who, get started, make the commitment to the protocol, to adhere to the timelines, the visits, the follow-ups, this is a very, very vital part of getting the quality of data that's needed to make the judgments on the value of the the clinical asset that's being studied, whether that's a biomarker or a therapeutic or a process or a procedure. But I think what's missing from equity here is recognizing that that data that's contributed, that effort that's made by the patients, it lives on well beyond the trial, and both sponsors as well as the community overall get tremendous value out of that. So in thinking about the equity, how are we going to actually compensate them? So it's like Scott is saying, it takes a different view. It takes, we've got to stand up for these patients and help them get the real value of what they're contributing. Does that make sense? I'll ask anybody to chime in on that.
Can I
Christine?
can I chime in
Yeah,
on
Christine,
that?
please.
So, a couple of comments. First, I think, especially here in the US, we need to first reframe the idea of clinical trials because we still have confusion as to what clinical trials are and what takes place and all of these things. And I think like you said, right, there is effort involved in trying to collect quality data. And if we're going to ask patients to be a partner in their care and with their data, and knowing that there are potential uses for that data afterwards, right, what I think we need to do is work with those patient groups to really bond them together, to make them understand the importance of their collective data, give them agency over that, and then broker out the data to whoever needs it, but with restrictions in there, with a patient group saying, we have all of these patients with this information. You can lease our information if you want to look at it that way. But if you violate any terms of our contract, we now can take that information back and give it to someone that we think could help our communities. And so I think those are one of the things. But I also think one other thing we have to look at is potential damage from some of these clinical trials. I just read that in India, they're passing laws that people have to be compensated if they are permanently damaged during a trial. And so those are things we also have to consider because they're participating in a trial, but they could potentially be giving their life. And so those are just some of the thoughts I have, and I'll leave it there.
And this is Sandra. Michael, in reference to what you were saying, and Christine, before I go to address Michael, what you just brought up were some very valid points. And Michael, in reference to what you just said, right? My thought is this. We've all been sitting here talking about access to healthcare and tying it into equity. So what's the problem and what's the solution? We need to start looking at optimal access to healthcare, because just simply access to healthcare is not going to benefit anyone. It's not going to benefit the patient. It's not going to benefit the provider. It's not going to benefit anyone in this healthcare system, right? We have to start addressing optimal healthcare. What is optimal healthcare? It's making actionable each of the items that we spoke about today during this equity is your topic. We spoke about items that should be actionable that would lead to optimal healthcare. And I'm quite sure if we offer optimal healthcare, the patients are going to be, inclined to do more, and and the provider is going to be inclined to do more. We have to stop getting giddy about this word equity and about this word access, and we have to start looking at how do we push optimal healthcare where both the patient and the providers can exist. and can do so without any further hiccups. So it's, to me, the answer to your question is we have to start doing this on an optimal level,
So
110%.
Sandra, it's Michael, and let me challenge you a little bit and help us understand, what does optimal healthcare look like? What is that?
Optimal healthcare, what it looks like instead of you stopping and saying, okay, well, how can we make this better? You talk to the patient and find out from the patient what they want and what they need, and then you go make that happen. Each of us that are sitting in this room or on this stage or listening, we each have the power to do that, to find out what does the patient, not only does what does the patient want, but what does the patient need. And once again, the patient needs everything that we have spoken about today. Pamela early on talked about the fact that her son, she got to pay all this extra money for her son to get the medicine that he needs to stay alive. Okay, well, let's put our brains together and our minds together and our power set together and make that happen. Make the moves that need to occur so that her son can continue to live the best life he has without all of these hiccups, without mom and dad having to, sacrifice maybe eating a dinner or taking him to the movies or to the amusement park. They can do all of that and still live comfortably. What does optimal healthcare look like? It looks like us saying, stop saying, okay, well, we gave them access, we gave them equity. What else do they want? We want, as patients, we want 110% of whatever it is that we right now are considering the best. What do providers want? They want 110% of the best resources that they can give to their patients so that their patients could get that optimal health care. So let's just stop talking about access to health care because it's a minute word and it has very little definition. And let's start talking about that optimal health care where the patient gets everything that he or she wants and so does the provider. And we are smart enough and we're dedicated enough to make that happen. That's what optimal healthcare looks like.
And I want to comment on that too, Sandra. I want to thank you for bringing up the physician, because I think the trust between a patient and physician has been broken. We've got so many different people stepping in between that relationship, and that needs to be preserved. And so when we talk about clinical trials, we should, especially when we're talking decentralized, we should also be including a lot of the physicians in these conversations. And so I see a lot of them missing as well. But I'm done. Go ahead, anyone else?
I also want to add to this and mention that the importance of having a clinical laboratory diagnostics services be included alongside medical clinical services within the clinical laboratory, within the site, the clinical research sites, or in conjunction or in partnership collaboration with. And the reason for that is because, if here in Mexico, at least, what works really nicely is that, patients are married to their doctors. So whatever the doctors say, they end up doing. And what has worked for us very nice in recruiting patients very quickly for trials is that, we tell patients, hey, you can come to us to perform the research here, but at the same time, here's the whole list of services that we're going to be providing for you at no cost for being part of this trial, or a discounted cost for many years down to come. And the thing about it is that I know this sounds a little bit maybe sometimes confrontational when it comes to running clinical trials, but we're not separate from the healthcare system. So I think that that's something that should, in my opinion, can be explored, and always have that type of collaboration between the sites and the labs and CLIA, CAP certifications. Because sometimes I hear them two of them, I hear a lot of silos happening in the US. I hear there is a CDC, there is this CLIA CAP certification, there is the the FDA regulatory, and so it seems to be very siloed. So I think we need to work at making them cohesive and having work together towards the health care of the patient.
I'd love to chime in here. I think, Antonio, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of a little bit more of an international perspective. I think we have a U.S. heavy panel here, and trying to be cognizant that many clinical trials are, global and multinational, and that U.S. healthcare slice of the overall global kind of pie we're looking at here. Earlier I was talking on the soapbox about the overcomableness of working through some of these administrative barriers, that there are services out there for patients, and, patient navigator, patient concierge type services to remove some of the barriers, right, and to eliminate them. One of the pieces we haven't talked a lot about today that I think is critical, because this is, as we've all acknowledged, this is like a super complicated, multifactorial challenge we're facing. But when we talk about equity, one of the things I think about is access and awareness, right? And we haven't talked a lot about, most clinical studies right now still take place in, urban centers, big academic medical centers, the well-known, tried and true places. I know we have a couple oncology folks on the phone today. We're always going to Dana-Farber and MD Anderson and Sarah Cannon and those things. But what about people who live in rural areas, right? What about, sure, DCTs is a great model, and maybe that can help reach some people. But what about going to providers that haven't historically participated in clinical trials, that might care for and have sort of close networks with underrepresented populations that we want to reach, right? We know that those providers, investigators, physicians, their patients have better healthcare outcomes when they look, feel, talk, act like their providers, and they have a better connection. And to me, that seems like one of the kind of clear areas that we can make a difference in is helping to sort of embrace, educate, involve some of these research naive physicians who are out there taking care of patients. They have medical training. They may not have a freezer, or they might need some GCP training or something like that, but they're out there. That's the next generation that really does help provide some access, relationship, and trust with patients that are maybe not in these sort of typical academic medical center circles. So I was curious if anyone had thoughts on that, or any recent experience or ideas about how we can expand a little bit and embrace these sort of non-traditional areas.
Go, Pamela.
All right. So I have some experience because I was part of founding a grassroots organization for the rare disease that I have. And they created, together with all of the patients, we have a clinical trials network, patient run, and the patients recruit physicians based on where the physicians or where the patients are located. So we have, it's a hereditary condition, like many rare diseases are hereditary. So it kind of happens in pods of people. So you'll have like a group out in Maine. I was in New Hampshire. There was a group in Alabama, and not necessarily near urban centers. So what they did is we have our own patient clinical trial database. Then the recruiters let the patients know when clinical trials are available that they would be eligible for, and work with the physicians in their local area, along with the main industry hubs like San Diego, Boston, Austin, to have them be like the main recruiting site, and then you've got your local physician, and so they'll work with patients to do a lot of telehealth visits. They maybe will have to go to Boston or one of the big centers once, but they can have their routine visits with the local doctor, which is much more convenient and reasonable, and the majority of visits can also happen via telehealth, so it becomes kind of a team. The other thing I wanted to speak with is regarding patient registries, patient-run registries. So that's clinical trials. Let me jump to the registries. So we've developed our own patient-run scientific registry where we donated our own genetic samples, and we have an IRB-approved national registry. And any researchers that want to do research using our samples, apply, submit their IRB approved study, and a panel of patients reviews and decides whether or not they want their data to be used for that particular study. So the patients choose who's on the panel, and the panel makes the votes. And so it's very patient centric. And we definitely feel like we're partners with the researchers, and we tell the researchers what things we're interested in. If they're interested in studying XYZ genetic chromosome abnormality, and that's not what we need or what we want, we will tell them, okay, that's an interesting concept, but what we need you to do is find out X, Y, and Z. Can you design a study that's going to find out X, Y, and Z? Because that's really important to us. And then the researchers will work to try to find grant funding to help answer the questions that we need them to solve. All right, I'll get off the soapbox.
There's no need to get off the soapbox. It's great. Appreciate hearing from everybody here. Before we are getting near to the top of the hour, Jennifer, if you would like to chime in, please do. I don't want to hold you up.
Oh, it's fine. I just wanted to say one quick thing. I think it's important to remember that they're really different models. I mean, the rare disease spaces versus some of these giant ones like oncology and diabetes. So, like years ago, I was running a rare disease program for Genzyme for Pompe disease. And same as, some of these stories, we knew exactly how many patients there were, like 110 in the whole country. And yeah, and if a new baby was born, we would basically bootstrap at the site wherever that baby was born. So I mean, that in that case, sponsors are going to have to do it. We know that. We're going to go to you. But what I find a challenge all the time is because, recruitment is always an issue. So it's true. Where do we go in oncology? MD Anderson and NYU and all the big places. And this is kind of closing the loop on this sort of, I don't know if it's equity or diversity. We're going to then, of course, find the same patients that we see at MD Anderson and, Memorial Sloan. But the bottom line is typically when we're designing a study, somebody will say to me, okay, you can have 25 hospitals. That's what you can have. Pick your 25. And so it's very hard to decide where those 25 are going to be. Naturally you're gonna go where you're gonna get the numbers, right? So we usually try to push to say, oh, let me have at least 5% or something at local community facilities, because I believe sometimes they're great, but the problem is it is a gamble. I've tried to develop some sites within my local community. I've knocked door to door on many doctors and say, hey, you want to do a trial? Let's bring some gastroenterology trials into our community. And a lot of these doctors are like, no, I don't have time. So I think what you're saying, everyone's saying, is that I think that's still a big area that has not been fully, tapped into. And I wish more local doctors would think about it, getting involved in trials, because it helps the patients, it helps sponsors, it helps all of us. So, and I don't think that pharmas don't want to be there. We'll do anything to get recruitment. The other thing is, look, if we place a study at MD Anderson or I place it in a community hospital, it's half the price at the community hospital, because the institutions tack on like 40% overhead. So we want to be there, but there's just a lot of limitations to these little sites to knowing how to do it and to having doing it properly. So I will pass the mic.
Can I comment really quick? I wanted to add to what Pamela
Sure,
had
Christine.
said.
Yeah, please.
Last time, I promise. So my thoughts are this. I have been on 3 unbranded campaigns for different pharmaceutical companies, same resources, different drugs. And what I think honestly needs to happen is there needs to be a platform that is at each community hospital or teaching hospital or wherever it is, right? That is made up of a board of physicians and patients who then look at the clinical trials that are offered, look at the products and things that are being offered to these patients, and put those local resources on from a community-based hospital, right? But instead of paying all of these different places and different resources, have everything available for patients in one place, and really work with the hospitals on bringing that to them. And that's it for there.
Thanks, Christine. No, absolutely. I think there's no doubt about it that the more streamlined things can become, more one-stop shopping for our any patients who want to enroll, the better. There were great hopes, for instance, for clinicaltrials.gov, but in many ways, it's just like they say, science never solves one problem without creating 10 more. And the reality is that clinicaltrials.gov just isn't the answer that most patients are looking for today. So,
and Michael, Stanford,
yes.
I was just there. I'm participating in a longitudinal study. They now have their own study site in collaboration with a few other university hospitals that they're offering their own trial. And so
Yes.
that's one
Yes.
thing that I think we need to look at.
Yeah, a lot of the certainly the research-based institutions are now creating a essentially a mini closed system. Some of these have had them for quite some time, like the Sarah Cannon group in Tennessee. There's just I think that one of the things that certainly was brought up earlier was the fact that everything seems to be so siloed. This is a very complex problem. The set of issues, Scott, you alluded to it earlier. This is just multifactorial. So I think that one of the things that we can take away from today that's really valuable is the fact that we're having this conversation. And so, first of all, on behalf of the team at Consuli, I can't thank you guys enough for taking the time to actually opine, offer your thoughts, your experience, etc. The more we can keep bringing this to the fore, just as this group, for some of you, you may not be aware that we actually used the Clinical Trials Clubhouse to crowdsource a response to the April draft DEI guidance that the FDA provided. So we as a group, collectively and individually, can keep moving this along, and that's what we certainly need to do. And we want to use this forum to keep airing good ideas and bring things closer together. So what I'd like to do in the remaining couple of minutes that we've really got here for the rest of today is just go around the screen here, if you will, using Sophie's approach, and let's just get 30 seconds from each of you, kind of a summary of where you think we are today. And I will note to you that this next month we will be tackling the topic of diversity. So we've done justice, we've talked a bit about equity, and we will talk about diversity next month. But Pamela, if I can start with you, 30 seconds.
Thank you for inviting me to participate. I think I'm not ready to go first. I'll let you guys go.
Okay, that's not a problem. So, Sophie, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, that's no problem. So I did put in the group chat, the room chat there, some of the really poignant ideas that we got out of this group today. So Pamela mentioned equity in treatment access, and access after approval of drugs and medical devices for patients who need them. And then Christine and you, Michael, both talked about equity in data sharing and income for patients who are sharing their data. And then Scott brought up the idea of equity in commitment burden, reducing the burden for patients. And then Ruby talked about equity in billing and paperwork and that process, making it easier for patients to allow them to actually access the treatment and spend their time with the treatment instead of the anxiety of the billing itself. And then Sanders talked about the equity and community participation and using the resources that we have in our local communities, instead of trying to find something outside of that, something new. And then Scott talked about pushing our new methods forward and not being afraid, like just like we were afraid when we moved from paper to electronic database. And that was something incredible and outrageous, and we thought that we were going to break the 21 CFR or our ICH guidelines by moving to electronic, and we're still here. So just like that, we can be a little bolder in trying some of these new methods to ensure equity and provide better access. And another thing Pamela brought up was the idea of patient registries. We need to give patients a little bit more control. And Scott and I both talked about, patient focus groups or involving patients early in the protocol design phase when we're trying to figure out how to design a protocol, the follow-up visits, the patient involvement and burden. I think those are really important. It's not only important to compensate and to make sure that their visits are covered, but also reduce the burden in the beginning. So, not so top heavy. These are some of the salient points that came out. And I think that, everyone brought some great points. I really appreciate this panel. I would love to hear from all of you if there's anything else you'd like to share, or, how can we implement some of these? That's what I'd love to hear next before we close. So we'll go to Jennifer and then Scott. Maybe we'll come back to Pamela. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think my overall summary is that obviously we have a long way to go in this topic, and it's a complicated topic. But in terms of clinical trials, I do think that this message is being heard. And I think people are talking about it in a lot of rooms, to be honest. We've been talking about what can we do to minimize assessments and protocols for 20 years, to be honest. But talking about ways to make things more accessible to the patients. Like, again, even the patient from this morning, I found out I had a patient that drove up and stayed in a hotel and quietly did that and never told anybody. And then I said, hey, wait a minute, I already have a budget to pay for that. Tell her we'll pay her back. So I think that there are resources available, but we have to make sure as sponsors and as sites that we're loud about what we need. And then I think sites will do it. I think sponsors will do it. They know they're at the mercy of the sites and the patients. So they want to. I think we just have to keep beating that drum.
Jennifer, I love it. Get loud. That's awesome.
I love it
Scott,
too. Keep beating that. Yeah, keep beating that drum, Jennifer. I love it too. There are services available. We have people sitting in on this clubhouse right now who provide those services, right? So it's more a matter of, again, maybe changing the formula, right? Is it a line item in a budget that sponsors are thinking about? Also, there's another angle to this too. I talked earlier about, if you can't get everybody on board with supporting patients and you need to show financial ROI, we can do that as well. That's really important, right? To just make sure. Also, the other angle too of empowering the patients themselves to know what is even an option for them, right? When they're going through the consenting process of a trial, ask, could this visit be done remote? Could I have a nurse come to my house for the week 4 blood draw? Can I do this next visit by telehealth? Like, we need to arm patients with even knowing what the possibilities are for them, because they can help drive this, right? And they can help kind of be part of this loud drum beating, like, not just up in the design process, but each individual when they're coming into a trial, almost knowing what your rights are and knowing what the options are that are available, because we really need to kind of keep changing the dynamic a little bit and making sure things are definitely more patient focused. So, and then in terms
Yes.
of where are we, I love the conversation. I love the perspectives. I do notice when we talk equity clinical trials, I know we end up, there's so many important, this multifactorial challenge here. I know we end up drifting a little bit into more traditional healthcare or other things, because there's so much work to be done. I think in terms of going forward and moving into the letters D and I that sound like are next on your guys' agenda, if we want to produce some specific outcomes or follow up or white paper or response, I think anything we can do to kind of keep our conversation narrowly focused, so that we can make some good progress on a narrow part of this would be really great. Not to minimize how important all the other issues are, but to keep us kind of focused might help us make a little progress too. So I really appreciated being part of things. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Scott. And that, I think you made a perfect way into some of the things that Sandra was talking about, empowering the patient. So I'm sure she has a cap to put on that. Sandra, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And as the room closes out this month, I actually want to draw everyone's attention to a couple of facts. Equity and equality are not the same. They don't look the same. If you ask me what equity and equality is, I'm sure it probably won't say the same thing that Sophie says, right? So they're two of the same things, and they're two different things, but we have to bring them together in a conversation because they both need to be spoken about and they both need to be addressed. So hopefully, into the next month, DEI, we can begin to talk about some of this, but I really want us both, all of us, to take a look at equity and equality, see what the similarities are and what the differences are. Then we could start having a conversation about how we can move forward. This is Sandra, and I'm back to you, Sophie, or is it Julie? Did you guys hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
we
because
We
I
all
did.
wasn't
heard you.
sure.
We did.
Yes, we did. Go
We
ahead,
did.
I'm
Christine.
I just wanted to say, I think that, we've been having these conversations for a long time, and I'm seeing progress, right? I'm seeing other people having these same conversations. And I think we just have to be vigilant, right? When we're going out there to make sure that that patient perspective is included and looked at in a different way. And I appreciate all of your insights and thoughts as we move forward, and hopefully we'll get a resolution at some point. But thank you all for always including me.
Absolutely,
Done.
Christine. We're joyful to have you with us always. Antonio, any closing comments?
I just want to add one more thing. First of all, thank you so much for everybody to be participating in this wonderful group. I just want to mention also, as a patient, as a son of a patient, my mom is currently under uh, chemo for her cancer therapy, and she's been giving me permission to share her testimony, her experience, and she recently finished her what's called a mammosectomy. Anyway, where she was removed one of her breasts for triple negative breast cancer at MD Anderson. Has done very nicely, in a clinical trial over at MD Anderson for immune therapy, and but she still has a note on her left breast, and so she's working with me and my friends to go through some diagnostics testings down on Johns Hopkins, and just to kind of like tell you, as from a personal, from a patient side also, the importance of incorporating cutting edge clinical laboratory diagnostics tools in the pipeline and making it accessible for the general population that doesn't speak English and that comes from minority backgrounds, I think is essential. If it wasn't for us, for unfortunately, I say that unfortunately because it is. If it wasn't for us, and our education at MD Anderson and my friends that have connections, I wouldn't have been able to get her enrolled into this trial in Johns Hopkins. So I think making it more accessible um, and more readily available to the general population, I think it's going to help not only my mom but also many other women and men who are unfortunately from disadvantaged communities. So just wanted to give you my personal touch as well, aside from the CRO perspective.
Antonio, por supuesto, muchas gracias. Appreciate your involvement today. I think what we're going to do at this point is we've gone well over our time, but this has just been such a complex conversation. We've learned a great deal, and thank goodness my wonderful co-moderator Sophie has taken great notes. I know that Julie has as well. But we'll share back with you, and don't forget there will be a recording archived for this, so if there are things that you heard that you'd like to go back to, please remember that that's there. And then also, please, each and all of you are welcome, and we hope that you will participate in next month's conversation when we address the issues around diversity. So Sophie, I'll leave it to you if there are any final comments, and then Julie, if you'll take us on out. I think we've had a wonderful West Coast morning and East Coast midday. Hopefully you finished your lunch, and we'll look forward to hearing from all of you soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank
Yes,
you.
my notebook and my heart are both full. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to promptly pass it on to Julie. Thanks, Julie.
Sophie, I think we lost you.
Well, thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to everyone here today. It was a really great conversation, and thanks for sticking around. I know we went over a bit, but there's just too much to pack into these really great conversations. So thank you to all of you. And in closing, again, I'm Julie Szmyd, Project Manager at Consuli and host for Consuli Conversations. As Michael said, if you missed any of the conversation, or you'd like to find a certain person, you can always review the replay, and you can find that in the profile of Consuli Conversations. So just tap the little greenhouse at the top, give Consuli Conversations a follow. You can see any past replays from all our various rooms. It's a great little feature. It lets you skip through. You don't have to listen to the whole thing if you're looking for a certain person or a certain part of the conversation as well. So check that out. Feel free to share it with anybody that you think may be interested as well. Pass it along. Invite others to the next room and bring yourselves as well. Be sure to follow me, all our moderators and panelists here today. That way you'll get pinged into the next rooms. And follow us on social media. We're at Consuli_Inc. Also, you can find that in my bio and the Consuli Conversations profile. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, if you'd like to be on this panel in the future, if you have someone to recommend, if you just want to say hi, I love hearing from you guys. My email is in my bio, so find that there. Love hearing from you guys. And check out our public virtual whiteboard. You can add comments if you're inspired, review all past topics. Just a great way to bring community together and see what everybody has to say. So again, those that join during our event or after our opening announcements and don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year, so we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent and assemble their data, including health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life surveys, things like that. Importantly, members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials, as well as data trials and other offers as well. So if any audience members want to be part of the data dignity movement and get a data agent or participate in clinical trials, you can sign up to be matched to a study at consuli.net, consuli.net. It's pinned to the top of the room. There's no cost for anyone to join our movement, and you can learn more about us at our website. So looking forward to our next Clubhouse discussion next month. That topic, an exact OBQ, will be out soon, so keep your eyes peeled, and very much looking forward to it. I'll leave the room open for just a few